Hi, welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I have something fun and I think quite inspiring for you today. We're going to be working with Crumb fabric. I'm going to teach you how to, first of all, make some blocks using crumbs from your stash. And I'll share with you exactly how to do that and what crumbs are. At the end, I'm also going to be sharing with you some projects that I've finished. Here's another crumb block that I've done. But toward the end of the video, I'm going to share with you some of the quilts that I have finished that are crumb quilts. And there's a variety of different ways you can lay out your crumb blocks and make something beautiful with scraps. So be sure to stay tuned until the end so that you can see the various quilts that I've put together and be inspired to use up your stash. I'll also be linking below my crumb playlist, which I have on my YouTube channel. It has a variety of different videos that will teach you step by step how to make crumb fabric and how to put them in quilts. This quilt behind me on the wall is one, and it's a series of, I think, 3 different steps or 3 different videos for this quilt, and it was a lot of fun. I basically made crumb fabric, and then I cut out orange peels and hexes. I used adding machine tape to make the sashing and the border. So make sure you check that out. I think you'll really enjoy that. And then I also have a number of other things I want to share with you today. First of all, I want to show you how I collect my crumbs. Well, this is the block that we're going to be working on today. It's a disappearing pinwheel block. And what I simply did was made a large piece of fabric, and then I cut it to 12.5 inches and combined it with some ugly cream colored fabric. In fact, today it's all about using up some of that ugly fabric that's sitting in your stash and you don't really care for it. But let's go ahead and use that. It's amazing what you can do with ugly fabric to make it very beautiful. So here is the block that I have made, and you'll notice the blue here, it's a sparkly fabric, which is really kind of atrocious, but it's going to work out beautifully as the sashing for all of these beautiful pinwheels that I've made in this crumb fabric. So let me get started on how this is done. All right, so here's a couple of baskets of my crumbs. And the first question everyone asks me when I teach about crumb fabric is, what size is a crumb? And for me, a crumb can be anything that I don't want to cut up in my Speedy Solutions techniques and store in my containers as squares or templates or strips that I'll use in those Speedy Solutions scrappy quilts. So a crumb can be as tiny as I want it to be or as large as I want it to be. And I do have a lot of pieces that are quite long that I add into my crumb basket. And the reason for that, as you saw on this particular block, sometimes you need a long piece to get all the way across the scrap. And you can certainly make pieces long enough, as you see that I've done here. I've added all of these little pieces together to make something long enough. But here, I just simply used a long piece of fabric. So I have everything in my stash from these itty bitty pieces to the bigger pieces. There's no limit on what I put in my stash. So I've got a lot. You can separate it, lights and coloreds if you choose. It's not necessary. I have made blocks, for instance, this one. I simply started pulling from my stash. You'll see lights and darks in this block. It's also nice to be able just to create crumb blocks that are maybe all color or all light. And I have some ideas on that as well that I'll show you later. Here are a couple of blocks that I've actually started. And you'll see I'm using tiny pieces as well as long pieces. I mentioned a moment ago about my Speedy Solutions techniques. For those of you who are new to my channel and are not familiar with that, I will link a video below that will take you out to my YouTube channel. It'll teach you everything that you need to know to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. This is the techniques book. This is the patterns book. Between the two, you get 17 scrappy patterns and all the techniques that you need. And that video walks you through step by step on this. So check that out if you haven't already done so. And so as I'm going through my scrap stash, if it's something that I just don't really want to get cut up and use in my Speedy Solutions techniques projects, then I'll simply put it in my crumb baskets, as you see here. All right, I have a few blocks here that you can see I've started. And when I'm working on crumb blocks, typically I do work on a couple of them at a time. That way I can just kind of chain piece as I'm working through the little sections. I always start in the middle with smaller pieces and then I just keep adding as I can all the way around. So let's take a peek here at what I might be able to put together. So we have these two little pieces. I could sew those together. And normally I will just pull out stuff from my stash and just start sewing. So I can make what kind of looks like half square triangles there. Here is a leftover remnant from a strip piece project that I had used, so I can use that in my scrap quilting. And then I can just continue adding parts and pieces around these pieces here until I have made something that resembles fabric. And you'll see here, I'm just continually adding more pieces to the outside edges of it. And I will just create 1/4-inch seam allowances. You definitely want to make sure that every one of your seams are straight. So straight seams, do not sew any curves or any dips. You'll end up with valleys and mountains in your fabric. There is a way to fix that if that happens, and I'll show that to you. I'll see if I can try to create a hill or a valley, and then I'll show you how to fix it if that happens. But we're going to start in the center and just keep working our way out. With every seam that I stitch, I do take my ruler and my rotary cutter and I trim it so that it's a perfect 1/4-inch seam allowance. You don't want any excess fabric in your seam allowances. That just creates a lot of buildup, and you're already going to have a lot of seam allowances in it anyway. So you do want to try and maintain that 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way through your blocks. So I'll work with these two at the same time, and what you see is I basically took sort of created a half square triangle, if you will, and put those together. And now I'm going to take a ruler and a rotary cutter and trim away the excess, because we certainly don't need any excess. I'm going to separate it first. It looks like my 1/4-inch seam allowance is fine. So I'm just going to finger press at this point. Now I can trim up this other oddball stuff that's right here, or I can simply grab another piece, lay it right there. I'm going to sew a straight 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there, and then when I trim that, I will trim that away and get rid of it. If you you can put all of this leftover teeny tiny pieces that are too tiny for crumbs. You can use them as stuffing in a pillow if you choose. Nothing really has to go to waste. There's something that you can do with almost everything. And so I think what I'll do is just add these pieces here. I'll take it to the machine and I'll show you what I've done. All right, I've just stitched these and I'm going to go ahead and finger press, but now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of this excess. So we'll get rid of this point there. Get rid of this little guy right there. And we'll open him up and we'll square this up here. There we go. All right, so that's ready to go. Let's clean this one up a little bit. All right, now what I could do is stitch. Now, as you can see, that is not a straight seam there, but I can easily make it a straight seam by just laying that on there, and I will sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance straight from top to bottom, and then I'll trim the excess away. Let's see what I can do here. We'll put that on there. Let me sew it and I'll bring it back. You'll notice that on some of them that I trimmed away, I added the trimmed away pieces to the opposite side of the crumb fabric. This is actually rather addicting. It's something that you'll just get started, and it's fun to do this when you're maybe listening to some good music or listening to a book on Kindle or something. Just a wonderful way to relax and just enjoy yourself as you're creating new fabric using the crumbs that you collect from your scraps. So this one is getting long enough that I could actually put it on there. I think I'll add this here first. Testing. So to speed this up, I definitely would just chain piece all of this as you're working and then bring them back, maybe do 5 at a time and then bring them back to your tabletop and do some trimming up here. So let's see what we can accomplish with this one. And when you add the longer pieces like this, let's say I don't really want that whole thing there. Maybe I'm going to chop that away and we'll work with something like that. And here's another one. Let's see, I'm creating straight seams in which I can sew my seam allowances. However, you don't have to trim them up like that each time. You could actually sew it and then trim it up afterwards. But I've gone ahead and created some straight seams here that I can use to continue stitching. And then just keep finding parts and pieces in your stash. Here's another one I could put together there. Just keep finding parts and pieces that you can use and continue growing your block. My goal is to make a couple of blocks that are 12.5 inches in square. So I've got to make them quite large. So I'm going to continue with these at another time. And right now I want to continue working with these 2 blocks that I had started before, and I'm going to grow them to 12.5 inches. We're going to have a pretty big chunk here. I actually combined some of those pieces I was just working on and added it to this. Now I want to put something out here to kind of help square that up, and then I'll need to add some more width to it so that I have a 12.5 by 12.5 inch square. You'll notice here this is kind of weird. I don't know that, well, this would not go together well at all. So I can simply, at this point, go ahead and trim it up so that it's straight, or I could sew it and then trim it up, whichever you prefer to do. Let me see if I can get this. And if you ever have any wonkiness where maybe there's a hill or a valley in there, just cut right through it and get rid of some of that wonkiness, and then continue adding things and ensure that everything is in straight lines and straight stitches. So let's see, how about if we do that right there. One thing I meant to tell you, I do a lot of finger pressing, but it's really important as you're growing your fabric to get it pressed in between adding more pieces. That really does help things to lay nicely. So when you can either have your iron close at hand or just immediately after a couple of seams, get over there and get it pressed. So I've gotten rid of that. And let's see here. There's a lot of fabric in the seams. There's a lot of fabrics in the seams, and it does affect the quilting to some degree. So the quilting that you're going to want to do when you're crumb quilting is very simple quilting, especially as you're stitching over some of the blacks that have lots and lots of seams. But it's growing and growing, and I'm going to get it to 12.5 inches, and then I'm going to show you how to make the disappearing block using your crumb fabric and a piece of I'm going to use a beige fabric here. I've got a lot of these beigey, taupey fabrics in my stash, and I'm not really keen on them, so I'm going to go ahead and use it as the other part of the disappearing fabric. So let's continue on this. And as soon as I have it at 12.5 inches, or at least 12.5 inches, I'll bring it back and show you how to get that casting. All right, I have a piece of fabric now that is large enough. I have pressed it, made sure that my seam allowances are trimmed down, cut away any excess points and things that were in there that we didn't need. There's already enough fabric in all those seam allowances, so it's always important to try and get rid of any excess that you don't need. And now that it's pressed and starched, I want to get it cut, and I want a 12.5 inch square. So I'm just trying to find a location on here where my points are not going to land in a seam allowance. And I'm simply going to go ahead and put it out. And all of this can be put back in my crumb container because I can use it to make more crumbs. And let me get the last two sides cut up here. All right, there we go. So there is a 12.5 inch crumb, and now I'm going to cut out a 12.5 inch square that I will use to make my disappearing block. I have my block ready to go, and now I've got the matching light square right sides together. And you're simply going to create a disappearing pinwheel just like you do in any other disappearing pinwheel block. I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch all the way around. Then I am going to cut it on the diagonal and make 4 pinwheels, or 4 half square triangles. All right, I've sewn 1/4 inch all the way around the outside edge. I have taken a long ruler and I've cut on both diagonals. And now I have 4 half square triangles with that beige fabric and with the crumb fabric. And then you can simply tilt it so that they are all, let's see if whoops. All right, there we go. And that's how we'll end up putting it together. For a typical pinwheel, you just sew it together just like that. And you can certainly do that. This is a typical pinwheel. Of course, you're going to want to press everything and then stitch it together. This block is a very large block. It's going to be, I think it's 19 inches, 19.5 inches. So it'll be 19 inches finished with the sashing in here. But I am just using up fabric. Now, you obviously don't have to use ugly fabrics as I'm using. And to many of us, these may not be ugly fabrics at all, but they just tend to be fabrics that I don't choose when I'm going through my stash. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and choose them and use them and make something beautiful from it. So I'm going to go ahead and create this pinwheel block, the same as I've done this, where I'm going to be adding some little blue sashes in here. And this is all 1.5 inch wide. I just cut strips of fabric from the blue fabric. It's 1.5 by the width of the fabric. And so I will add them in here, and then I'll add it in the center, and then I can attach it to the side here, just as I've done there, and then continue adding sashing around the outside edge. This is going to be a quilt that will go together very quickly because it's so large. And it'll be a wonderful quilt, more of a utilitarian quilt that can be used maybe for picnics. I can have it in the car for, it's always nice to have a quilt in the car in case we break down. We live up here in northern Illinois, so there's always that possibility of that in the wintertime. So it's always good to have something warm in the car. You can take it to the lake, use it at the cabin. It's just a wonderful quilt that I think will be able to be made very, very large and can be used on beds. It can be used for comfort. But I think my quilt will be used for utilitarian purposes, but maybe yours is going to be your beautiful fabrics, and it's something that you're going to treasure. So here's how I'm going to put this block together. The first thing I'm going to do is add this 1.5 inch wide strip. My length here is 8.5. Yours might be different depending on how you put your blocks together and what size square you start out with, but mine happens to be 1.5 by 8.5. I'm going to sew these two together right here, and then I'm going to sew these together right here, and then I will add the strip in the center. And again, this is a 1.5 inch wide by the length of this. And then I'll actually add the top and the bottom as well, since I already have it on this piece right here, and then I can add it to that. And these blocks go together really quickly. I recommend doing the crumb quilting while you're maybe watching television or listening to a book or music. It's very relaxing, and it's just addicting to just start putting scraps together and creating something beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up just as I've done this one. Very simple block to make. You don't have to add the sashing if you don't want. Your pinwheel block can look just like a normal pinwheel block, but I've just expanded mine. Now let me give you some ideas on some other ways that you can use your crumbs. All right, this one is Crumbs on Point. It is a PDF that I have out on my website, and I'll link the pattern below in the description box, as well as the video. You can find all my crumb quilt videos that I've done on tutorials in the crumb quilt playlist, which I'll link below. But this shows all of the crumbs, and I believe I just used a 6.5-inch square on each of these and made crumb blocks to that degree. And it's kind of fun after every project to just crumb up whatever leftovers you have from the project that you were just working on, and then just get them to a certain size and square them up, and you'll have them ready, and you'll have a stack of blocks in no time at all. And then I just used some squares, some 2.5-inch squares from my Speedy Solutions scrap stash, as well as some strips and some additional light squares. And I set all of this on point, and it does have some setting squares, and on the top of it, you'll see the corner there. I don't have it bound yet. I did get it off the quilting machine, but it's not bound yet. But what a fun project this was. And this one is Crumbs on Point. I wanted to mention is I have this really large jumbo rickrack. It's all red, and I've got a number of packages of it. And I'm thinking, but when I'm adding my binding, I'm going to add that rickrack against the blue there. So I'll try and do a video on that. If I think about it, I'll try and do a video on how I'm adding that. But I think that'll just give it some fun look around the outside edge. Just a really fun way to add binding. So that is that quilt. And here's another one. This is a project that I've done, and I've got a PDF on my website. It's called Floating Crumbs. And what makes it look like it's floating are these dark silhouettes behind each of these crumb blocks. It's just a lot of fun to create something like this. So hopefully you'll try some of these. And again, this is probably another 6.5-inch block. And I just continued creating crumbs after each project, or I just sat down one evening and just started making crumb blocks because it is, like I said, a lot of fun. And then this particular block is right here. This is part of it. There's a gray square here, a gray square here, a black strip here, and a black strip there. And that is what the block itself is. And then of course it's sashed with the gray fabric. And so it makes it look as if it is floating. There's an outside gray sash here as well. All right, so here's another project. And this again is out on my website. You can get the PDF out there. It's for a prairie point crumb purse. And so these are all prairie points that I created and did a fancy stitch across there to secure them. And then all around the side, the bottom of this purse, and down the inside a little bit are the crumbs. I created a long piece of crumb fabric for that portion of this purse. And I have a piece of crumb here that I used also. A very fun project. And so if you like to make purses or totes, this is something to keep in mind or try. Make yourself a crumb tote bag or a purse. And then the last one I wanted to share, and there's also a link on my video for this, and the PDFs for these leaves are available. We're coming into the fall season, and so this is kind of fun. This is actually confetti, where I took my tiny little crumbs and I laid them under a tool. So there is a tool, Tulle. It's a gold tool that I used, or maybe it was a green. You know, this is a lime green tool that I used here, actually. And I appliqued these down, and this is a little centerpiece for my table for fall for Thanksgiving. And the PDFs and the video is out on my Crumb playlist. I'll have that included so that you can take a peek at that. So check out my Crumb playlist. There's just so many videos out there for you to check out and have fun with. I also have a crumb quilt, which is on the long arm right now, so I don't have it here to show you. But I made the blocks using the colored pieces, and I made all of the sashing using the light fabrics, so that I'm using everything. What I think I'm going to be doing in the next couple of months is creating a quilt that uses nothing but my light colored crumbs to create a block and get all of that used up in a bright background fabric. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stay tuned. Hopefully, if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, comment to my videos. I'm really working hard at trying to get up to 20,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already subscribed, please don't forget to do that. And leave a comment. All of that does help my channel to grow. And it's wonderful to be able to get my videos out to other quilt guilds and friends that you might have. So please go ahead and share my videos with your friends and your quilt guilds. I thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for joining me today and watching my tutorial on crumb quilting. I hope you get inspired to grab crumbs from your stash and start having fun making some crumb quilts. Thanks again. Until next time, have a wonderful week and happy quilting.